chapter. And from that point, we are now customizing everything to reflect the ARMA Keystone PA process and the chapter itself. So one of the most difficult processes to do is the website. We are in the process of converting that over, but there's questions that have to be answered with the company that does our website and what needs to be done and how it's going to need to be done. So while you are currently seeing things coming through from the Liberty Bell chapter, it will be the rebranded Keystone PA chapter going forward. So look forward to that in the very near future. I think the new URL is www.armakeystonepachapter.org. So look for that, and we'll have new sections to the website and a lot of new information going on. We are going to have a joint chapter meeting with ACEDS in Philadelphia. That's in March. We'll talk about that after our current speaker. And let me introduce her now. Our speaker is Brianne Aul, commonly known Brie, or with me is Pittsburgh. She is the firm-wide record senior manager for Reed Smith, and yes, you can tell because my head's down, I'm reading your bio from the email. She's held that position since 2009 and was promoted after serving as record supervisor for the firm's Pittsburgh office in 2006. She has served as past president of the Pittsburgh chapter of ARMA, is a founding steering committee member of the law firm Information Governance Symposium. She became a CRM in December 2014. Congratulations with that. And that's something that I hope we all would aspire to achieve. But most importantly, I think we have to congratulate Brie on her level of tolerance, because not only is she the member of the board of directors for the ARMA Keystone chapter, she was also on my board for the Mid-Atlantic region of ARMA and had to tolerate me there. So if you got to do that 2 times around, you definitely need a medal, a star, or whatever. But welcome, Brie, and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray, and thanks, everybody. Because it's the 18th, it's still January. Happy New Year to everybody. Just one quick note regarding my bio. I was at Reed Smith in a prior role, as Ray mentioned, overseeing their firm-wide records program. But I am the senior manager of IG strategy and operations at Morgan Lewis, and I have been there for the past 7 years. Even though I am based in Pittsburgh, as some of you may know, Morgan is a Philly-based firm. In fact, just recently moved up the street towards the train station at the new building, the 2222 Market, which is a beautiful building. But I say that because, as Ray knows, despite the Penguins-Flyers rivalry, which quite frankly isn't much of a rivalry anymore, Philly is a really awesome place, and I spend a lot of time there in my current position. I will say that it seems like Pittsburgh may be the beautiful, balmier side of the state right now, because Ray mentioned it's 18 degrees there. It's 25 degrees here, so you're welcome. Make sure if you're visiting, bring your sunscreen. The one thing I did also want to mention, and this is absolutely a tribute to Ray and the rest of the Liberty Bell, now Keystone chapter board, is that the Pittsburgh chapter, for which I was part of for several years before joining the Mid-Atlantic leadership team and subsequently being a director for the Keystone chapter, is that the Liberty Bell chapter has always been wonderful in terms of, number one, extending invites to us, but also allowing us to present. And so I appreciate some of you have had the pleasure or perhaps displeasure of hearing me before, but certainly I hope that you're getting something out of this. I always welcome the feedback. So obviously, working for a law firm, you can imagine that I have to start this off with a disclaimer. My ideas, my presentation, my singing, all of that is mine and mine alone. The firm, absolutely, I'm not representing the firm, especially in my singing voice, which I have none. I always try to put that in, and my husband tells me, nah, don't put it in, because you can't sing worth your life. But I also wanted to say that this particular presentation is a bit more law firm focused. As you see and have heard from my bio, my primary experience within IG and records has been in a legal environment. So as I go through the presentation today, I will try to do a brief explanation or clarification of certain things that may be more law firm specific, that may not be self-explanatory on their own. Certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me, and I'm happy to clarify further. And then the Law Firm IG Symposium, just one quick note. I think some of you may have already seen or read the reports before. This particular symposium is an ongoing effort. So certainly if you are interested in learning more about what that symposium is after this presentation, feel free to reach out. So I mentioned to Hutch before many of you joined the call that during the first week of the year, I had a team meeting where I asked my team about resolutions, what resolutions, New Year's resolutions they were making for themselves. And the range of responses I got were pretty telling. A few said, resolutions, I don't make them because I don't keep them. Resolutions, no way. I had others, including one individual who said, oh yeah, I have them documented. I even have a resolution buddy who is keeping me accountable to attaining them. So it's funny because I think it may have been Robert who mentioned resolutions seem to be kind of on their way out for many people. And maybe the nomenclature of a resolution certainly is, but I think the spirit of resolutions, especially in January, are always a great thing. I love the idea of a new year, kind of blank slate, a little bit more quiet, especially if the last quarter has been filled with holiday fun, but also just a lot of holiday stress, that you have a time to take a pause and say, what could I be doing differently? And so Forbes Health had an article that I don't think will surprise any of you as it relates to some of the top resolutions. And it is funny because, yes, I think one of the reasons that these resolutions are on this list is that they happen every single year. I'm sure if it were an article from 2020, well, maybe let's skip 2020, 2019, or an article from 2026, 2027, you'd probably see the same things because, yes, a lot of times resolutions are made and then a couple weeks later, they're not kept. But I think what's great about these particular resolutions is that you can make them very similar to what we do with IG. So I would ask that you bear with me as I try to correlate what is considered a personal New Year's resolution with what you can do regarding your information governance program. So first things first, improve fitness and diet, number one resolution. I look at that as let's assess your program. And by program, I mean IG. So on the right-hand side of your screen, speaking of the Law Firm IG Symposium, you'll see what is the process wheel. And what's funny is that this particular process wheel originally had been a different graphic, but is probably the most known item that was a deliverable from the Law Firm IG Symposium back in 2012 when we were trying to figure out, well, what all falls under this broad scope of information governance. We determined that there were certain tasks that were already under maybe records management, retention, and disposition being one. But as programs and as new topics happen to come along over the past now decade plus, this particular graphic and what was on this graphic expanded to include those processes and considerations circa today. So if you look at this particular wheel, you'll see, yes, there's things like retention and disposition because that's still a very key part of what we do, but you'll also see data governance on there. You'll see client directives, again, things that have gained a lot of momentum and support, not just in law firms, but in many industries, and certainly have a 6 degrees, if you will, maybe not even 6, to information governance, such that the symposium decided we need to account for those too. So my point is this. Let's assume you have an IG program in place. That could be a whole host of different things. I would suggest looking at something like this. It doesn't have to be this. There's the EDRM model. There's multiple models. There's multiple articles. But regardless, take a look at something that defines IG for your industry and assess yourself. What do you have in place and what don't you? Where do you have a seat at the table and where do you not? So Morgan Lewis, as I mentioned, is a law firm based in Philly, but it's all across the globe. In fact, we're one of the top, one of the largest law firms in the world. And so certainly I am not responsible in my role for every single spoke on this wheel. However, I do serve on committees. I work with different departments or stakeholders to ensure that IG is at least threaded into the conversation. So again, doesn't necessarily mean that you have it in place means that you are responsible for it, but you have it in place at your firm, your organization, and you are involved in or have a seat at the table. That's really important because again, if it exists and you don't know anything about it, there's an opportunity for you to start making those connections. And that goes to the last bullet point, which is where do you need to foster those relationships? I appreciate, especially I think after the pandemic and remote working shifted quite a bit, that there are certainly new titles, new individuals, and new roles. And maybe you haven't had an opportunity to do your outreach to those individuals. I would highly suggest that you make that part of your resolutions this year. Do a quick virtual meet and greet. Let them know who you are. Talk a little bit about your program and talk about how you can help them further their program as well. So there are multiple tools and mechanisms to get this type of information. I tried to make this as simplified and bare bones for this presentation as possible, but it also helps to take a model like the principle or process wheel that I just shared and identify for your particular organization, not just whether you have it and who's responsible for it, but what type of documentation exists. And by the way, is that documentation reviewed and updated on an annual, semi-annual, what have you basis, or is it in somebody's head? Or maybe it's a process or policy that when you look at the date is 5 years, 10 years old. Is there an opportunity to revisit that particular documentation and update it so that it's inclusive of how your organization, your firm operates today? Communications and training, I think, are hugely, hugely helpful here, especially because I have found that in many situations, firms use new hire orientation as a means to tell people about their programs and policies. And for those of you who either recently started a new job or at least remember your first day, your first week, I suspect your questions or your thoughts were, where am I going to sit? How do I get paid? Who am I going to be working with? Who am I going to be meeting with? All of that more personal information that everybody gets concerned about when they start a new job. I would love to tell you that when I sat in my very, very first job outside of college, I was thinking, well, I hope these individuals have a records and retention program because that's why I'm here. I would be absolutely lying to you at that point. So again, I think the important point is that communications and training should be consistent with respect to your policies and processes. So as part of your resolution efforts, revising or revamping, or even just reviewing your program, think about and ask your question, when's the last time that you've sent a communication out as a reminder? Is there signage, digital or otherwise, about certain aspects of your program? Are your policies incorporated into any type of annual training or attestation that your employees have to complete? And if the answer is no, absolutely, they get the information when they are onboarded and then they never hear from us again. That's indicative that people are probably not in compliance with what you want them to do and possibly are operating under procedures and processes that are antiquated and aren't accounting for what you or how you want them to behave in present day. So again, I think this will be really, really important. Have an honest assessment. It's fine that you will find some gap areas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's being honest with yourself as to the fact that those gaps do exist, and that perhaps the initial outreach that you did when somebody joined, or maybe a training that you did prior to 2020 isn't necessarily retained in one's mind, given everything else they've been experiencing, and perhaps a good opportunity to revisit with them. Am I involved in the effort, and how? Also an opportunity to be honest with yourself. I think that there is a tendency for individuals to hide behind email and not necessarily have the difficult conversations. So if you find that somebody is not involving you in a particular process, and you send an email saying, please keep me involved in these discussions in the future, or is there a way for me to be added to this call, this meeting, this D-list, whatever the situation may be? All well and good, but you're not really conveying the importance of why you're there. So Teams, or your way of chatting with individuals, whether it be face to face, whether it be the good old telephone, or whether it be through another digital means, use the opportunity to schedule some time and explain why it's important for you and your team to be involved in those efforts, because it may be that you're able to use that as an opportunity for further collaboration, so that you're selling, or explaining at least, your program to others within your organization, and they can essentially act as an ambassador for you in terms of, well, geez, not only should you be involved in this, but I think you should be involved in that and that and that. So again, it's a lot easier to have those types of synergistic conversations, as opposed to sending an email and saying, well, I sent an email and they said they would, and I guess everything's okay now. There's a lot more that can be done to really strengthen not just your program, but your role within your organization in terms of why it's important for you to be there. And then, of course, next steps, which can be a whole host of things. I would suggest start small and work your way up. I think very similar to resolutions, people who want to, let's say, lose 100 pounds, they're probably thinking, that's grandiose, right? It's usually not sustainable to lose 100 pounds within a week. But if you say, lose a pound a week, lose a pound a month, lose a pound, whatever the situation may be, then maybe you are setting something in terms of a next step that seems more attainable. You're more likely to make it happen. So going back to what I mentioned with respect to gaps, these are just some examples. Again, some law firm specific, some that are not, that you can ask yourself as you're doing this type of exercise. So retention and disposition, it's funny, I initially was going into this particular presentation saying, I assume everybody has a retention and disposition program of some sort. Some people may have just started it, some may have had it in place for a decade. But then just as I was thinking that, I got an email from the Maryland chapter where they're having a presentation about creating a defensible disposition program. And I thought, okay, maybe I shouldn't assume that everybody is well on their way to retention and disposition. So let's stop for a minute. Number one, do you have a retention and disposition program? If you do, skip to the next chapter. If you don't, absolutely do what you need to do to get that program in place. If that is the only thing you do in 2024, it is absolutely worth it. But let's assume that you do have a retention and disposition program in place that's operated for some period of time. So think about what you're addressing. I think in law firms, the idea was to start with the low-hanging fruit, right? The paper. Even to some extent, our document management systems, those areas where we had a definitive tag that said this relates to this client, this matter, this record. But the reality is that data is stored in so many different repositories, law firm or otherwise, that it's worth reassessing. Are we addressing every single repository that we should? do we have certain collaboration tools, for example, that are storing data? Are we using certain cloud-based solutions that we need to incorporate into our policies and our schedules? Do we need to have conversations with vendors or with business departments or practice groups to make sure that we know what and how that data is being stored? Do we know the agreements that the firm or the organization may have signed that talk about this specific thing? So again, opportunities to make sure that you have a defensible disposition program. Going back to what I mentioned, there is a presentation happening in Maryland, I think in the next couple of weeks. So absolutely happy to forward that invite if you didn't receive it yourself. But also thinking about your program as it relates to tools. So my general feeling is you can go to vendor halls at conferences or the like, and you can see some really fantastic tools, right? And you can get very excited about the magic that these tools do. But then when you start looking at it from a practical perspective, or when you start looking at it from a budgetary or approval perspective, you realize that having a blank slate means that the tool itself isn't necessarily the right time for your organization. So for example, if I did not have a particular disposition program in my company and I see this awesome tool that allows me to perform disposition in a more automated fashion, it may seem wonderful, but if the question is, well, what are you doing right now? And I don't have an answer, it's hard to say, well, but this tool is going to be the silver bullet that really makes everything better. So let's assume again that you've started your disposition program and you have a process that is a bit more manual because again, you wanted to build it from the ground up, you wanted to test and tweak and refine. Okay, where could you be automating that process? Now, those tools that looked perhaps a bit like a unicorn when you first saw them now don't seem so unicornish. That's my word for today. And you see opportunities to leverage them for processes that you have already tried and tested yourself and you know work, but perhaps are creating more of a delay in getting to that next level or completing certain facets of your program. So filing compliance, and this is something that for law firms and legal IG practitioners continues to be a discussion that, you know, again, it's funny because for law firms, a lot of attorneys that are in firm A may end up in firm B and ultimately firm C, firm D. And so from a law firm IG perspective, we all have similar challenges because we're working quite literally with the same exact people in many situations. So one of the $1 million questions for law firm IG practitioners, which I appreciate may not just be specific to law firms, is this idea of an official repository for matter records, right? So in many law firms, the document management system is that, but certainly with the emergence of tools like OneDrive, you know, Teams, even other repositories like an e-signature tool like DocuSign, you know, you can start to see that there are multiple repositories that either you do want the data stored there or you don't. So it's defining where else, again, are people storing data? Is it okay for that data to be stored there? Can that serve as the official repository? And if so, do your IG controls apply to it? Or is it a situation where they're storing data in a repository you don't want them to? So what do you need to do to mitigate that risk? Beyond communications and training, is it a situation where you need to define a shortened retention period? Do you need to lock down how and if data can be stored there? So again, filing compliance is probably the number one challenge in most firms, and it's an ongoing conversation, but certainly one that can be improved upon if the right questions are being asked and the right steps are being taken for remediation. Outside counsel guidelines. So this is one of these law firm terms that you may or may not be familiar with. Outside counsel guidelines are the guidelines that the client provides the firm that used to be historically more billing requirements, things of that nature, and then emerged to include security requirements, and now in many situations retention requirements, and how data is to be returned or destroyed at the conclusion of an engagement. So in law firms, depending on size, structure, et cetera, outside counsel guidelines usually involve multiple teams reviewing them. And IG, though not necessarily a department that initially was involved in the effort, absolutely needs to be now. And so it's, again, making sure, are you getting those outside counsel guidelines? What's the process for your firm to get those? And how do you need to be included? This is where having that verbal conversation with whoever manages that process in your organization is key. And then looking at those guidelines in terms of what's being asked, what retention requirements, what security requirements, and more recently, what requirements or instruction are you or your firm being provided regarding the usage of AI? All of these are IG challenges, right? So good challenges to have, but challenges nonetheless. And I will say that in prior discussions with other law firm colleagues, there was one particular individual who worked at a firm in the Midwest, and everybody during this conversation was talking about just the challenges of outside counsel guidelines and making sure that they're in compliance with them. And this particular individual said, I love them. I get so excited when we get them. We all thought, okay, that's unusual. Nobody gets excited about these. Why are you so excited? And she said, because I use them to sell my program. I say, this is important to your clients, our clients, which means it needs to be important to us, which means we need to have this in place. So with that positive mind frame, you can absolutely use outside counsel guidelines in a law firm as a means to say, again, this is important to our clients. Our clients are asking us to do XYZ regarding these particular facets of IG. So if you have just been in that vicious approval cycle, so to speak, where you haven't yet gotten a facet of your program or process approved, absolutely being involved in the process with outside counsel guidelines not only ensures that you're in compliance with what you're being asked to do, but also it's a means to leverage certain tools, processes, approvals, et cetera, that you have desperately needed. Data ingestion, again, what are we agreeing to take? So with law firms, there are a lot of questions and conversations that happen before an attorney or lateral group joins. And sometimes IG is involved in those conversations, sometimes they're not. If you are not involved in those conversations, you absolutely need to be, because if you are not, guess what? The responsibility still comes to you in terms of managing that data throughout the entire life cycle, whatever that life cycle may be. Privacy. This is actually one that I think is critical to build the relationship with who is responsible for privacy within your organization. If you yourself are not that person, I will say that somebody I personally have learned from the most in my organization is our privacy officer. She's incredibly knowledgeable, but she's also very willing to explain the impact of the laws on us as a firm, on our clients, and just having those more frank conversations makes it so much more clear to me than reading a regulation. Not a lawyer, don't play one on TV. Having the conversation is, why do I need to care about it? Absolutely makes it more impactful. It gives me the oomph I need to make sure that my team, my processes, my policies are in compliance. And certainly, again, if you have a privacy officer in your organization that isn't you, I would say the other, if retention and disposition is not your number one goal this year, building the relationship with your privacy officer absolutely should be. Third-party engagement. This is not necessarily just those vendors that you work with in information governance or records, but those third-party vendors that your firm is signing on. going back to those applications and solutions that I mentioned that may be hosting data outside of what you are currently governing, you absolutely want to know, how's the tool being used? What and how can retention be applied? And at some point, ignorance and negligence will not be an excuse. You are expected to know and have a process that this information is being properly ingested by your team and that you're effectively managing that data. It, in essence, falls under you as an information governance practitioner. So again, are you having conversations with your procurement team? Are you seeing the questions that the firm is asking? And is there anything regarding data retention? If not, opportunity to make sure it's included. All right, so that's the first resolution. Second resolution, improve finances, right? Again, everybody is looking to save money, especially after perhaps the last quarter splurge on holiday gifts and festivities. But from an information governance perspective, let's think about what we're actually paying for our team. So retention is probably the most common, right? You have the storage of data, perhaps the overstorage of data, which obviously, as those of you in ARMA are aware, is probably one of the biggest costs associated with our program. But I think what's important to understand is that there is a lot of possibly file destruction happening within retention programs across IG land, but not necessarily a cost savings, right? And that's for two reasons. One, it may be that certain files are being destroyed, but not the entire process of outperming a box with your storage vendor, such that the cost is ultimately, or the savings, I should say, is ultimately realized. But also in terms of the new storage, right? The new addition of inventory. So retention is, in my mind, really meant to be a means to address the stuff of the past, but you want to have a moment in time where you're stopping the bleeding, right? So if it's a situation where you've destroyed 20 boxes, great, but you've just taken on 1,000 boxes, and by the way, that 1,000 boxes of data is stuff that shouldn't have been stored in that media to begin with, you're not really saving a whole lot of money. So it's looking at your program from a holistic perspective and saying, what's the ROI in terms of cost savings with respect to retention? If you're not seeing a cost savings, it's likely either because you're not outperming your old stuff, which again, your vendors can absolutely give you those types of reports if you don't have access to run them yourselves within a particular storage system, or what you're ingesting is still greater than what you're getting rid of. And that's why it would lead you to think about the different processes you may have that you're not necessarily changing people's behavior such that you will never get caught up with respect to your storage accounts and what you're saving. And though, of course, I'm speaking more from a physical side, physical record side in that situation, there is absolutely a cost associated with electronic data, especially in systems that people haven't touched for years. It's information that nobody is even aware of exists, but everybody's afraid to touch it, right? I'm afraid to have my name associated with the deletion of this content. So I'm just going to let it sit there. It's going to be sitting in a less expensive storage repository. So I'm perfectly fine with it just sitting there forever and ever. There is still risk associated with it, not just in terms of the storage costs, but certainly the risk costs, which ultimately have a dollar number tagged to it. So if you don't have a technology map, some catalog of what applications may still be housing data and are still in some way stored or housed within your environment, work with your respective IT department and more specific group to identify, okay, what are we paying for right now? What are the applications that we're paying for? Okay, are they being used? If they're not, what's in them? If what's in them is duplicative of what's in this other system, easy win, should be easy win. Is it data that met your retention policy and can be purged? Another quote unquote easy win. Or is it a situation where ongoing conversations need to happen amongst business groups? Does there need to be, or is there a need to migrate certain content out of it? Again, all of those conversations can happen, but the point is have the conversations. And the easiest way to have those conversations is really finding out what you have and what you may not even be aware of that you have. And then with respect to the department organizational structure, I think this is something that is really critical at a time where we're trying to right size, so to speak, different departments within any organization, including law firms. I will say that anecdotally in Philly, we had a really great opportunity to right size our records and IG team by having them support each other. So as I mentioned, we just moved recently from one location on Market Street to another. We have a records team who had primary responsibility for the records element of that move. But when you're talking about as big of a move and as big of a building as that ultimately was, we, rather than adding additional resources, were able to ask other members of our team who are focused on other IG processes to pitch in and work with the records team to do that massive move, with the understanding that after the move was done, we then had the records team available to not only help the IG individuals get their backlog, to the extent that any existed, back up to speed, but it was an opportunity for them to learn from each other. So the IG team had an opportunity to see what the records team did. And when I say records, and for us, the clear definition is records. Our records team handles the local on-site physical records tasks, digitization, offsite storage, etc. IG handles more retention and disposition of all data, more of the electronic records component, compliance, matter mobility, all of those different processes. In any event, my point is that rather than saying, oh, let's add them all here, let's subtract them all there, and vice versa, it was, how can we have them work together? How can we shift it so that maybe everybody's attention is focused here right now, and then ultimately switching gears and focused here in the future? And the good news is that it kept everybody's job, I think, a little bit more interesting, because you got to learn something that you weren't necessarily responsible for on a daily basis. Workflows, I think, again, are really, really important to have mapped out. If you are looking at those particular workflows and you see certain tasks that aren't necessary, there's an opportunity for cost savings as well. So maybe somebody is still filling out a form to say that their matter or their files should be sent to a particular location. My guess is that those processes were in place maybe 20 years ago, and somebody just was never told not to do it. Take the time, tell them not to do it, and that will start to capitalize in terms of just savings, not just in terms of the resources being used for said process, but perhaps the time being invested to ensure that this unnecessary process is being completed. So as I mentioned, easy wins are really, really important. Understanding where you can achieve very quick wins will not only help you stay motivated to continue to improve your program, but also it's an opportunity for you to make a name for yourself. I assume all of you are very well known, well respected within your organization, but let's assume there are individuals who haven't had a chance to meet you, don't really know what you do. Here's an opportunity to do that. Look at where training will help. Again, training and outreach is not a one-time deal. It needs to be consistent. You don't want to be annoyingly consistent where they're having to do training every quarter or every couple weeks, but certainly something that it is on an annual basis. I don't think it's too much to remind people, hey, this is how you're supposed to be handling your data throughout its life cycle, and here's our processes. And then also from a partnership and leverage perspective, thinking about those other teams that may not fall necessarily under you, but that you should have partnerships with. InfoSec, privacy, even knowledge management. How can your processes and program create a savings for them or a risk mitigation for them? And there you can sell your program and have, again, some advocates outside of your department that may have different relationships, different leverage than you currently do. So there's other opportunities to improve finances in terms of different aspects of your groups. Consultants, there are consultants that are available, and some of you, number one, you may do this for your own role, but some of you may have engaged with consultants who will look at your respective program and identify maybe a charge that you shouldn't be charged in accordance with your contract, or recommend a process optimization or even elimination. I will leave it to you and your organization's culture and budget as to whether that's the right fit for you. Offsite storage vendors, as I mentioned, if you aren't getting those reports directly, or you have a way to get those reports, by all means, you should be asking your storage vendor for those. It will be insightful to see what you are paying for and what you perhaps shouldn't be paying for. Statistical information, anything that you can grab from different dashboards, like, for example, if you have something like a click or any type of data visualization that you can say, hey, X amount of data hasn't been touched, or we've had an opportunity to reduce here, not here. That's certainly something that, when you're speaking with leadership, we're interested in dollars and cents is certainly important. Quantifiable information for those who are looking strictly at dollars and cents rather than let's say the soft savings, the risk mitigation, as I mentioned, which there is absolutely a financial tag associated with it. But sometimes to generate that, you have to start doing scenario-based planning, which some people appreciate, some don't. When you're talking about real term dollars and cents, we are paying for this every year, and we don't need to be. A lot of times that will call certain individuals and leadership to action. And then circling back to what I'll be talking about in just a moment with respect to the IG Symposium, start building those relationships outside of the firm. And finding out what others are doing, where they've been able to get some wins and approvals and how they did it. You'll find that the IG community, especially in law firms, is very sharing, very happy to talk about how they were able to get something done. Feel free to ask. All right, lose weight, the reduction of rot. So going back to some of the things I just mentioned, really understand your existing footprint. This is where all of those lovely catalogs of repositories of data, how much data is being stored in them, whether it be in storage boxes, whether it be in gigabytes or terabytes of data, whether it be in numbers of repositories, etc. Understand what you have. Identify where you can start to reduce. So if, again, you're in the habit of sending multiple boxes offsite of stuff, is it something that's already electronic that you don't need to send? Is it something that can be digitized? Expand your retention efforts. Maybe your program started conservatively. We're only going to touch things that have been closed for X amount of years. Have you run into issues? If not, talk to the people who gave you those initial parameters and demonstrate how you haven't run into any issues. Maybe they're more inclined to say, oh, we said 20 years, maybe we're fine with doing 15. Maybe the legal requirements have changed and now it doesn't make sense for us to keep things 10 years, it should be 7 years, or 7 years, it should be 6 years, whatever the situation may be. And then consider deduplication tools, especially in situations where you're a very massive organization, massive firm. Deduplication tools can create some pretty easy wins. And then I know I've mentioned this already, but stop the bleeding. It's really important to look at it from behind in terms of cleanup, but in terms of ahead as to how do we get ourselves out of this situation. Make sure that you're having, or that you're involved in, conversations with people as they're joining your particular firm. make sure that you know what they're intending to bring, and make sure it's not something that will have no real need within the firm, meaning a closed matter that isn't going to be touched, personal files that should be stored elsewhere. Again, ensure that what is being brought in is in alignment with your policy. Creating visualization dashboards. There's so many out there, some free actually, that you can consider for those who, again, really need to see the story, so to speak. And user awareness and education. Again, all of this is stuff that I've already mentioned, but I have it multiple times in the presentation because it's really, really important. It takes a village. So yes, you are responsible for governing your organization's data, but it takes everybody's buy-in to be compliant. So make sure they understand the whys of what you're asking them to do. So these are some of the questions that we already discussed with respect to expanding, maybe being a little less conservative if you have demonstrated that you've been able to be successful within your program and processes, especially with your policies. I know that there have been so many presentations, so many discussions about the pandemic that I'm hesitant to bring it up yet again, but I think it was such a critical event. Obviously, from a human element, it was, it impacted so many lives and families, and we all, I think, appreciate that and are sensitive to it. From an IG perspective, the shift to remote working, whether it be hybrid, whether it be fully remote, whether it be kind of a sliding scale, 2 days, now 3 days, now 1 day, now whatever days. In the end, people are working in a way that they didn't before, or at least more people are working in a way that they didn't before. There is a risk if you don't know how they're storing that content, whether it be digital, whether it be physical, but whether it be what have you. You need to understand what your policies are dictating as it relates to that, assuming that they do have something. If they don't, again, easy win. Put it in there, get it approved, let people know. But from an office environment, where are the opportunities to say, people aren't coming in anymore. So these file rooms that were oh so important, because what if somebody needs this stuff right away? You know what? They sat at home for 2 years and really never touched it. Is it really something that they still need right away? I suspect the answer is they don't. And so there's an opportunity not just to reduce perhaps what's being stored, but the rooms that are being housed to store that information. Is it something where you can work with your real estate team to get off a floor or consolidate efforts or repurpose certain space so that it's not something that's being used for something that really isn't necessary. Improve mental health, process automation. So going back to that original chart that I mentioned, it's really important. The column that I would also add is what technology are we using and who is doing this? So the idea is that people, again, I think tend to see technology and have 2 different schools of thought. One, it's the silver bullet, they buy it, and maybe they're successful, or otherwise it sits on a shelf or only a portion of it is used, not the whole enchilada. Or people say, this solution, I don't even have a process. What am I supposed to do? So it's either a technophile approach or a technophobe approach. The idea or ideal would be kind of doing the in between, saying, yes, technology can help automate processes, but you need to have the processes in place in order for technology to automate them. So if you think about your program, your processes, and things that perhaps are being done more manually, consider whether there are tools that can make that process significantly easier. Anecdotally, one of the things that we were able to do this year is automate our legal hold notification process. And it allowed a process that was otherwise much more manual than it needed to be done in a systematic fashion. And the good news is that we were able to configure it in a way that we were generating some responses and interaction that made it a lot easier for us to ensure that all of our that all of our holds were up to date, that we knew what was still active versus what wasn't. So again, that's just an example of what you could be considering as it relates to your organization. But the key point is thinking about what you have that's creating a big time suck, big people suck, right? So if you say, well, I have Betty, and Betty is spending 30 hours of her week on this process that I know there's a tool out there that does in 5 seconds. There's an opportunity to say, well, what else could Betty be doing if you instead had this tool? So these are just some law firm examples of processes that can easily be automated. Matter mobility, for those of you not in the legal environment, this is the process where an attorney goes from firm A to firm B. Client decides to go with attorney to firm B, and their data ultimately is sent from firm A to firm B in accordance with firm policy and procedure. Retention and disposition. Email filing. Yes, email filing still presents a challenge. I have a feeling 5 years, maybe even 10 years from now, even if we have so many different ways of communicating with one another, which I fully expect to be the case, email filing will seemingly still be a challenge, but there are tools that help automate that process. Ethical walls, again, those screens that are set up in law firms to restrict certain attorneys from accessing matters being worked on by other attorneys, legal holds, and of course, with our good and great friend AI, there's just going to be endless possibilities. So make more time for loved ones, build the relationships with all of these groups. For those of you who have been on a presentation with me before and you say, gosh, she brings it up every time. I bring it up every time because it's really, really important. I am an introvert by nature. Left to my own devices, I would not be presenting in front of you today. I'll leave it to you to decide if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would not be part of the IG Symposium. Again, I would be very much happy to talk with my small circle of individuals and not do anything else. But I can't, right? In order to be successful, in order for my work and my program to be successful, I have to step out of my comfort zone. I have to build those relationships and I have to foster them. It's not enough to say, hey, I'm Brie, I handle this. Let me know if you need anything. Well, goodbye. I need to check in. What's going on? How are you doing? What can I do to help? Here's how you can help me. Make the time to do that. If you set aside, let's say 30 minutes a week to just do an outreach, a quick check-in call with one of those particular groups, again, that speaks volumes and will basically be an ROI in tenfold, because again, you are making yourself known and they are working with you. They become your champion and help leverage your efforts just as you're able to do for them. Learn a new skill. I know some of you may have heard of AI before. I'm not sure if all of you have. I, of course, lie. If you have been outside of, well, let me say this. If you have even logged on to, your computer, you check your phone, in, let's say, the past 5 seconds, you have seen at least one article, one email, one webinar, one what have you about AI. Again, much like other technology, you see the fear factor, robots are taking over the world, versus, hey, I have this cool new AI tool. And by the way, 5 days ago, I did absolutely nothing with AI, but now I'm an AI expert. Again, I think that the reality is most of us are somewhere on that scale, in terms of some of us know more than others. Some of us are just delving in. None of us, I think, are full experts, because the technology is obviously changing too quickly for any of us to remain experts. Let's say that. But the reality is AI is going to impact our processes, what we do, how our company works, who and how we will be allowed and permitted to use AI. So again, if you haven't done anything as it relates to learning about AI, especially as it relates to your industry, I would suggest before this week is out, Google AI and whatever, AI in law firms, AI in healthcare, AI and whatever, and just be aware of the trends so that you're able to understand, again, from a 6 degrees perspective, how they may be impacting you as it relates to your own governance of what is being generated from said AI technology. So it's important to also understand that there's this kind of healthy relationship between AI and IG. There is governing what is being generated by AI in your organization, but also understanding that there are a lot of ways that AI can help support your governance program. Learn both, because it can absolutely be I'm going to say a love-hate relationship, because that's probably a little too extreme. Let's say that there is a risk and there's an opportunity. You need to understand the risks and your program needs to address, but there's certainly opportunities as well, and you need to know how you can leverage it to make your team, your program more effective. AI, as I mentioned, is probably the number one skill set, the number one topic that everybody should be learning about this year, but certainly that's not the only topic. Think about technology that is new or new to you, regulatory requirements, especially as they change within the organization or within the countries and regions that your organization operates, and just general industry knowledge, even if it's not something IG specific, just appreciating, again, the trends that are happening within your industry, within your organization's industry, I should say. There is a very tight relationship between how IG may be impacted or how IG can assist with said trend. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. Certainly, again, if any of you want to learn more about the IG Symposium, I'm happy to chat separately, but just a quick history. It was established in 2012. It's sponsored by Iron Mountain, but you do not have to be an Iron Mountain customer to either access the reports or be part of the symposium. So if you're interested in the reports, if you want to be part of the symposium, but you aren't necessarily an Iron Mountain customer, don't worry about it. It's not a requirement. The beauty of this particular symposium is that it is not just IG focused individuals, but it's individuals from different disciplines who have an IG component: security, risk, KM, as I mentioned, records, to the extent that your organization or organizations view records separately from information governance. So the report topics are all over the place. And I don't mean that in a disorganized way. I mean it more in terms of the natural history of the program was to start with what is IG in a law firm, hence that wheel that I have shared a few times. Who needs to be involved? What are the key challenges? Matter mobility, information security, outside counsel guidelines, again, all of these things that I've already touched on today in the presentation. But you'll also see that there have been revised or revamped reports as those particular processes have changed in and of themselves. So these are some topics that we've done recently, 2019, 2020. All of these reports, by the way, are available on Iron Mountain's website. I think you just have to submit your contact information. I believe they are gated. 21 and 22, some further information. This matter mobility paper, for example, is a 2.0 version of what had been done, I think 5 or 6 years ago, because that in and of itself as a topic has changed so much. We do talk about AI in 2022, and the upcoming reports, which are being drafted right now, are related to AI and IG, changing IG roles, and retention for the 21st century. So certainly I'm happy to let you know when those reports are available. But if you follow Iron Mountain on LinkedIn, et cetera, they also promote when they're available as well. So certainly I'm happy for you to share this report or report presentation so that all of you have the landing pages and appropriate sites to get the information. But as I also mentioned, if this is something you would like to be involved in, feel free. It is an opportunity to collaborate as opposed to just sitting and listening. It's an open dialogue, and there's a Vegas rules where even if you're running into a challenge in your firm, you don't have to worry about people running out and spreading your dirty laundry, so to speak, but ultimately looking for ways to assist you, because our problems, and challenges are so similar. By the way, this is just one way to get involved. ILTA certainly has many different programs that are spurred from the work and the people involved in the symposium. There's also a legal roundtable, which is different from the Law Firm IG Symposium. We meet on a monthly basis, and it is, gosh, I want to say about 30 or 40 firms right now. It's pretty big, but I'm sure many of you know who Lee Isaacs is. She's a huge she's been a huge advocate in ARMA and ILTA, but she's pretty much a rock star for Law Firm IG. So she facilitates that legal roundtable. Certainly, if you are interested in being involved in that, let her know. You can certainly let me know, and I'm happy to connect you with Lee. So in closing, how do you keep a resolution? Number one, seek support from others. You're not by yourself. Going back to what I said earlier, I've got one member of my team who has someone who's keeping her accountable. Find someone who will keep you accountable. It has to be somebody who will give you the hard talk if you're letting yourself off the hook, so to speak. I sent an email, nobody responded. Then pick up the phone, then chat them on Teams or whatever the situation may be. You have to get out of your comfort zone. Create a reward system for yourself. So many of the LinkedIn certifications that you see people posting that they just achieved this particular certification or completed this class, I think that's kind of cool. It means that they're sharing some of their own goals, but then you start to see, much like social media, that immediate reward, the likes, the comments, oh, congratulations, etc. And last but certainly not least, have compassion for yourself. It's okay that this isn't going to be done by the end of January. Part of the reason that I think resolutions are so cool is the idea is you've got a whole year in front of you. Just know that even in a year's time, you're not going to have everything done, and that's okay. But it's important to take those steps forward. That's, make a plan for yourself, write it down, however you writing something down is meaningful to you, and take the next steps, and ultimately you'll be happy with what you're able to achieve in a relatively short period of time. So apologies for staying or keeping you 3 minutes late. Here's my contact information. Happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you, Brie. Question, Hutch. Do we have any questions in the chat box? I think silence is golden.
He's there somewhere.
Yeah, he's there somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh God, I was muted. Sorry. Here it is. And the answer is yes. Here's a question. Do large law firms like Morgan Lewis have a single tool, or at least a main tool that does everything? Controls retention, destruction, dates, runs, the litigation whole process, keep track of client guidelines, matter mobility, etc. Anything like that at your firm?
I will say that we personally use multiple tools, but if the follow-up question is there a tool that is law firm specific? The answer is yes. Again, I am not endorsing because I don't use these products personally, but I know, for example, File Trail, if any of you are using that or familiar with it, it does have capabilities to do a lot of IG processes. There's another tool that's escaping me right now. I can't remember the name, but it's UK based, and absolutely it's a similar process where if you're looking for a one-stop shop, yes, they absolutely exist.
And one more question. Does your firm have outside training for information governance purposes, like similar to privacy or sexual harassment training, or is it more low key and something that your team comes up with on its own?
So in terms of training for IG, internal training, it is homegrown. So we partner with different groups like our tech ed department, compliance, like we absolutely takes a village, as I mentioned earlier. So we don't use an outside vendor for that. But again, I know other firms who do. So admittedly, I can't give any immediate this vendor does this, but I can find out. So Hutch, to the person who asked that question, if you would be interested in connecting with firms who are using outside consultants for that type of training, I can absolutely put you in touch with people who are.
Thank you.
All right, and I guess the third question was, how have you put up with Ray for so long without, you know, driving him off a bridge somewhere?
Well, the good news is that Ray has become a Penguins fan. He'll tell you he's a Flyers fan, but he is not.
Oh,
He has a Sidney Crosby shirt, and don't let him tell you otherwise. So that's why he's one of my favorite people.
Oh, Cindy Crosby, yes.
Cry baby Crosby. Oh yeah. I'd burn that jersey. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, Brie. Awesome presentation. You didn't answer the third question, but that's okay. Please join us. We'll have your presentation posted and shortly, as well as the recording that's being done now. So you can review it on the website later. And next month will be a joint meeting with the ACEDS Philadelphia chapter. It'll be Transparency and E-Discovery Costs from Sonia Judkins. And you have the ability, if you're local here in Philadelphia, when we send out the invitation, that you can go to the location within Philly if you want to attend in person, or you can attend online virtually like you're doing today. So Brie, again, thank you very much for the presentation today. Awesome as always. And we look forward to everybody joining us next month.
Appreciate it. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Brie. Take care.